it is my honor and privilege to be introducing Bianca Dueñas to you all. Bianca is, first off, her pronouns are she, her, and ella. She is an immigration staff attorney, a director of San Joaquin Immigrant Empowerment Project, and she is here tonight. We're going to kind of do an interview style format. All right, so Bianca, thanks so much for joining us. First off, is it okay that I call you Bianca?
Of course.
Okay, excellent. So thanks so much for joining us tonight. You have such a rich story to share, not only in what you're doing now, but also what you have done and how you've come to this place. So let's start at the beginning. No, I don't need the birth story or anything, but tell us in regards to welcoming the stranger, no longer strangers, and the concepts of our study. Tell us a little bit about your background. How is this personal for you?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me, and I hope you all can hear me well. This is not ideal, but at least I have a phone charger, AirPods, air conditioning, and I parked away from the sun. So thank you all. Thank you, Deacon Tom, for inviting me. So I was born in Lodi, California, which I think many of you here know is a big farm worker town. There's a lot of wineries, so there's a lot of vineyards. So both of my sides of my family, both my mom's side and my dad's side, they're both from Mexico, and both of my grandpas ended up here because of the vineyards, because of the grapes. So they both worked in the fields, and both my parents and their siblings all worked in the fields. So I grew up very much aware of farm worker life. From when I can remember, my parents weren't working in the fields anymore, but it was very much a part of my upbringing. My grandpa was still working in the fields. A lot of my dad's friends and family members were still working in the field. So it was a big part of my upbringing. And my mom says that from a young age, I just was really aware of the conditions and sometimes the treatment. And so I just knew that I wanted to do something with farm workers. I just didn't know exactly what that would look like. And to avoid all the details of my story, I ended up going to school at Lodi High School, which was a predominantly white school, but I did well academically and ended up going to, having the privilege to go to Stanford. And then from there, at that point, I really knew I wanted to be an attorney. And so that was my goal. I was kind of working towards that. And I knew I wanted to do something with farm workers. And at that point, immigration was very, very important in my life. I became more aware of my parents' immigration story, my grandparents' immigration story. A lot of my family members, if they were not undocumented, they were still permanent residents. So a lot of my family members were not citizens at that time. And so then I got married. My husband was actually in the Marines. And so we did a little bit of traveling, which just solidified to me, like, this is really what I want to do. And then I had the privilege to go to UC Davis Law School. And I actually selected that law school because they have a really good immigration program. And then had the privilege to get a job right out of law school where I currently am working right now. So at California Rural Legal Assistance Foundation. It is a statewide nonprofit, and our primary clientele, our primary community that we serve are farm workers. We do different types of legal services, including workplace discrimination, workers' rights. We file class actions on behalf of workers. And then we have a big immigration unit, which is the unit that I'm a part of. All of our services are free. We have income caps. So all of our clients are also low income. In fact, if you make more than X amount, then we can't serve you because, the thinking being that you would likely be able to afford an attorney. So our clients are amazing, really special. And I just feel super privileged to have arrived at this point in my life. And I really, really love my job.
Oh, excellent. What a journey. It sounds like it just one thing led right into the other for you.
Mm-hmm.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So you became aware of the struggles that many of your clients are facing now as you came up. You heard these
Mm.
stories. It's woven into the tapestry of your life. Share with us a little bit, because I think many of us are not aware of what some of the greatest struggles your clients are facing.
So I grew up, my parents, Spanish is our main language that we speak at home. And by the time I was born, I guess my parents both spoke English well enough. They had been working here in the US, but they made a decision to only speak Spanish. I'm the oldest of four. So when I started school, I actually didn't know English. But it was a decision that my parents had made to say, we want her to learn Spanish first, which is really interesting because I also have clients whose children were raised here but actually don't speak their primary language, their family language, because of the racism and discrimination that the parents face for not speaking English. And so I think you see this both ways. And I was, now I realize I feel was very privileged that my parents were able to value, to see, and I don't want to say value because I think all of my clients value their language, but it's because of their experiences and the way that they've dealt with them that they made the decision of, I'm going to protect my children by making sure that they speak English without an accent. And so my parents did the opposite, but the result was I started school and I didn't know any English. I was in English as a second language until like second grade, I think. So some of those struggles that my clients face, I kind of remember them growing up. I don't want to say it's the same because again, my parents made that decision for us. It wasn't out of necessity in the sense that they didn't know English. It was just something that they wanted us to really, have a solid grasp on. But I would say language is definitely one of them. I still have a lot of people in my family that don't speak English or, don't speak English very well. And then another one is probably, socioeconomic status of my clients are all low income. My clients and their children, as children of farm workers, often have a sense of, I'm a child of a farm worker, and maybe kids that say things to them at school because of that, and have a lot of identity issues, I guess, growing up. So I remember that as well. I would like to think that I was always really proud of my family upbringing and where I was from and my roots, but I'm sure there were issues where, I was in school and I probably got made fun of, or there were comments being made, and you kind of would rather blend in with the crowd instead of standing out in any way. So those two things really stick out to me.
Um, let's backtrack just a little bit to the multiple languages. I think that a lot of folks may not be aware. So it's not just that folks may not speak English, and it's not as simple as English to Spanish, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
there's not just one language or one dialect, right? So what,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, are there cultural and dialectical as well as linguistic challenges in providing services for your clientele?
Yes, and that is a really good point. It's especially prevalent in farm worker clients and farm worker communities. So obviously Spanish, I would say our main client base are from Mexico and Central America. We do have clients that are Asian American or from other countries, but I would say predominantly just based on history of where our offices were located and just past work, they're primarily Mexican and Central American. And of course, the predominant language in those continents and in those countries would be Spanish, although, like you mentioned, there are a lot of dialects. So specifically in Mexico, there's states in Mexico that have, people have immigrated from there and end up in the United States, and they speak different dialects, including Mixteco. And while it sounds similar to Spanish, like I can't communicate in Mixteco with a client.
Mhm.
And so we do have to find translators. Currently, we have a staff member that speaks Mixteco, and so it's really super, super helpful in the Fresno area. There is a big Mixteco community of farm workers, so we do serve them. But that does become another kind of layer of challenges of serving not just farm worker communities, but also immigrant communities just generally. When in Honduras and Guatemala, there's also really small communities that speak all different dialects. When we represent them in immigration court, there are times when you have to fight with the judge because they want to make the client proceed in the dialect or the language that's most similar to the one that they speak. It's not even the one that they understand or speak. And they really pressure you to say, well, when are we going to be able to find an interpreter that speaks this language? And so as an advocate, it's, understanding and realizing how important it is for a client to understand the deportation proceedings that they're facing in their own language. So it is challenging at times. I definitely think that because of the community we serve, and most of our staff members do speak Spanish, it's probably not as challenging for us as maybe other nonprofits that are in different parts of the US, but it's still a big challenge.
I can't imagine how difficult that is to maneuver through. So thank you for continuing to work through that. And that's just the beginning of the challenges your clients face, right? That's just the surface of what folks are facing. I know you've spoken about some of their different struggles as well. Would you share with us maybe what the greatest misconception is both directions? So what's the greatest misconception most US citizens might have of folks dealing with immigration, coming in and immigrating into our country, and then vice versa? What is the greatest misconception that many of our immigrant friends have about coming to the United States?
Okay, this is a really good question. First of all, I could talk for hours just about that question. So I know that we talked a little bit about this, and so I think my greatest misconception ready. But I think to provide some context, I think we all have to understand that the immigration laws haven't really been updated. The actual laws haven't been updated in more than 20 years. Regulations have changed, policies have changed, priorities have changed. There's been executive orders by presidents, but the actual laws have not really changed much 20, 30 years. And the landscape of our country, the landscape of the immigration, world is so different now than it was 20 to 30 years ago. So at a very basic level, I think at whatever spectrum of the political, whatever area of the political spectrum that one finds themselves on, and regardless of your beliefs on the immigration system, and I think we should all be able to agree on that things are so different now, and that the immigration laws just are not appropriate for the way that our country looks like today. So that is kind of where I start with when I have conversations with friends, with family members that honestly probably don't understand why I do what I do. And so I always start with that. Like, can we agree that there has to be a change in the immigration laws? Like, the immigration laws now they just don't fit where our country is right now. And most of the time everyone's like, okay, yes, right, there has to be reform, there has to be some changes. And then it's like understanding that even 20 to 30 years ago, when we could, just assuming that those laws match the way that the country looked like at the time, they were already unjust, they were already broken. So when you're talking about unjust and broken laws that are 30 years old, we're talking about a just really messed up immigration system. And so that's what my clients are fighting, is a system that just doesn't match at all what our country looks like, and oftentimes in a language that they don't understand. Immigration laws are said to be, in the United States, immigration law is said to be the second most complex area of law other than tax law. So even for us, even those of us who have grown up in the United States and have been educated in the United States, can read and write in English, it's really complex. There are attorneys. My executive director has been an immigration attorney for like 30 years. And so she's, has been practicing since the last reform, and she still finds areas of law now that she's like, wow, I didn't understand that, or I didn't know that. So immigration law is really complex. And to get to the specific point of what is the biggest misconception is The last time that there were immigration reforms, there was a change that basically penalized people who have been in the country, who enter the country without permission and have remained here without permission. So there are millions of parents who are undocumented, have United States children, that are now 21, 25, 30 years old. But because they entered without permission and because they have remained in the US without permission, they can have no criminal record, they can be law-abiding residents, pay taxes, they will never get a green card. And that is because while a United States citizen can petition a parent once that United States citizen is 21 years old, if that parent entered without permission, that United States citizen cannot grant their parent a waiver of that entry without permission. So the laws are built in a way where it allows a child who is now a US citizen, who is a US citizen and is now over the age of 21 to petition a parent, but the laws do not allow for that child to grant a waiver to that parent for that unlawful entry.
So they're basically we're separating families in yet another way. Or
yeah,
we're
that is
that young adult citizen, right, to be very cautious and afraid of how they live their life because it could potentially put their parents at risk.
Yeah, so if there was one immigration law, if there was only one that I could change, it would be that one, because it literally affects millions of parents. And very interesting enough, when I was in law school, I wrote a whole paper on how how the US has kind of encouraged the quote unquote illegal immigration when it was convenient for the US. So when you look back at wars and the shortage of labor, there were laws that would encourage people to enter without permission, or the US would intentionally kind of look aside and not enforce those laws that were in place. But then whenever there was kind of any anti-immigrant sentiment, whenever there was any worry that our economy was going to crash and we didn't have enough jobs for everyone, then the US would either create more laws or start enforcing those laws that were already on the books. And so to understand that there was this history of allowing and encouraging the entry of immigrants for labor, mostly for labor, and then you have these laws that purposely penalize the unlawful entry, it's just really unjust. So that's probably the biggest misconception. You hear about these stories, and I have family that still do it. When you hear about, a father who was picked up and deported after being here for 30 years and they have 4 US citizen children. And I hear people say, he was here for 30 years. Why didn't he just get in line? Why didn't he just start the process? And it's so infuriating because it's like, there is no line for him. There is no way, because 35 years ago, he entered one time without permission. Yeah. So sorry, I could talk forever about that one. That one area, that is the biggest misconception. And that honestly, they say, I think the numbers are around, there are 12 million people in the United States undocumented. I would guess more than half of those people are affected by that one law.
My own grandparents came over through Juarez doing that, exactly, where the government looked the other way because they needed non-American males to come fill the factories during World War II. And this was how it got taken care of. Yeah. It's a very tangled web that many folks are unaware of. There are so many things we would love to learn from you. I am also aware of the time. There's just not enough time, Bianca. There's not enough time. But I do want to say thank you. We would like to open up for you opportunities for you to ask questions of Bianca and to share a little bit about how the study and what Bianca has shared tonight has brought you to a new understanding or questions that remain open for you out of this. What are some blistery spots, some warm spots that need some tending to tonight? So if you have a question, I invite you to put your name, your first name, last initial. I think we're pretty safe doing that, over into the chat box. If you don't have chat box available to you, I know for some folks it's a visibility issue, just go ahead and use the option to raise your hand, and that will stay up until we call on you. And I'll just type your name into the chat when I see a hand go up as well. So go ahead and pop your names over in there if you have a question or a comment. So we're going to start off. Look at that. Bishop David, way to lead the way. All right, the floor is yours.
So my question is, we heard about the antiquated reality of immigration law. Love to hear about your optimism, if you have any, regarding possible law reform over the next 5 to 10 years. You know, do you hold any hope that we're going to see some significant movements to change the landscape that you described, and one in which you're so invested?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I think I had more hope going into this new administration, given the negative attention, you know, put on immigration under the Trump administration. I did have a lot of hope that something had to give. I am a little disappointed in Congress and our representatives of how political it has become. You know, reality, at least obviously I'm biased as an immigration attorney, but it's a human rights issue. And, you know, I think there's even a split between activists, immigration activists, attorneys, practitioners. There is a lot of people who think it should be an all or nothing. We have control of, you know, the Senate, we have the presidency, we should go for a big reform. And then there's some that say, you know, we should try a piecemeal. I don't know. I think given kind of the stall in Congress, maybe the piecemeal is the only thing we're going to get. But I would be lying if I didn't say I wasn't disappointed. Yeah,
Bianca, and I share that disappointment. I was talking to a group earlier today about windows of opportunity. It feels like the window is getting smaller and smaller. And by your face, I know you know that intimately well. And that I'm fearful about that.
Yeah, and I hate to think like, you know, because in the immigration active, you know, in the immigration sphere, you don't want to say that this community is more important, or this, you know, let's get some reform for the DACA population, let's get some reform for farm workers, let's get some reform for essential workers, which is kind of how this piecemeal process feels like. But I don't know. I mean, I know a lot of my clients who are undocumented parents and have children who have DACA are like, yeah, let's give my kids something. So I don't know. I'm really torn, and I am disappointed. But you know, I think I have to have hope, or else what am I doing in this, you know, in this job? So
thank you.
Thank you. Canon Anna.
Thanks, Pastor Julie. Bianca, I work closely with an immigration attorney that specializes in religious worker visas. And in that process, which is a whole like separate category of immigration law in and of itself. But I'm wondering if you could speak to what you've seen or heard from your colleagues about the impact of COVID on the immigration process.
Yes, so we don't do any religious worker visas, but I can definitely speak to COVID. I mean, I think it has impacted the immigration world in so many different ways. There's obviously the border issue, and you know, the shutdown of the borders, which, you know, the administration said it was due to health concerns and the pandemic, but I also feel like there was some joy in them being able to shut down the borders and leaving so many people stuck in Mexico. So there's that part. And then the shutdowns of immigration courts. Obviously, we understand the global pandemic that we are still in, but that also delayed cases. And there didn't seem to be any like creative solutions working. It was just kind of like, all right, the immigration courts are shut down. We're sorry, you just have to keep waiting. And that leaves families in limbo, right? Like when you have a client that's in active deportation proceedings, I mean, they're not really making plans for their future. Everything is so uncertain. they're not going to buy a house, they're not going to move, they're not going to find a new job. Everything is just kind of stalled. Like, what's going to happen in a year, in 2 years? Am I going to be here to see my child graduate? So that was a huge psychological effect on our clients. And then affirmatively with the immigration agencies, there were no interviews. So the processing delays are just out of control. Even now that everything kind of is up and running now, the delays are just immense. So our clients will feel this for a while still.
Excellent. Thank you.
Sorry.
Go ahead. Ken and Anna, did you have more to ask?
Yeah, just a little piece of follow-up. So I know that the immigration courts and the system were already backlogged pre-COVID. So now we're talking about even more delays and people being sort of stuck in the system. Yeah, I that has me greatly concerned. And again, you know, talking about separation of families and people being stuck on one side or the other. So thank you.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, the immigration courts are just absolutely, like, already pre-COVID, we're so delayed. I have a family that is in deportation proceedings. They've been my clients since 2015, and we have not had their final court hearing yet. And yeah, family separation, because they have family members. My poor client, she has some of her children here and some of her children in Mexico who would be derivatives on her case, but the case needs to be adjudicated and hopefully approved, and then she can bring her children. And so, you know, I have another dad and a son, and his wife and younger children are in Guatemala still. And his individual hearing, which is, you know, the final hearing, is not scheduled until 2022. And he's been apart from his wife since 2018. So the longer delays means, yeah, more family separation.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you.
Mm.
So Luis says he wants us to backtrack just a little bit and asks, in your opinion, what would the hallmarks of all-out immigration reform look like? What would be the hallmarks?
So I think I have two answers depending on who I'm talking to. I have kind of my dream would probably be a very generous reform, and then there's the more practical answer given the political divide we have in this country and how politicized immigration has been. And so I think the safe answer that a lot of, you know, politicians and even immigration activists have probably come to understand as most likely would be where they do like a date, like if you've been here since, kind of like an amnesty type thing, or if you've been here since X date and can prove you've lived in the US for, I don't know, 10 years, whatever it is that they decide on. And inevitably, I'm assuming that there would be some criminal carve-outs. That's generally how things are, to say that certain convictions or situations would make you ineligible, or would require you to have some sort of a waiver to prove that, yes, I, you know, did X thing or committed X crime, but I'm applying for a waiver of that given my circumstances. But I think, knowing what I know about the clients I serve and the families, I think it's really hard to say you are deserving of this, you are deserving to be here, but you are not. And this criminalization of our communities happens a lot. I mean, it happened even under the Obama administration. It just happens a lot to say, when you create criminal carve-outs, when you create arbitrary deadlines, like even DACA, to say you had to have been here before, prove that you were here from June 15, 2007, like why that date? And so someone that came June 2nd, 2007, all of a sudden isn't eligible, they're not worthy of that. So it's tough, but and I know that probably doesn't answer it completely, but those are just some of my thoughts.
Go ahead, Luis, clarify or ask more.
It's Louis.
Louis, I'm so sorry.
I suppose my question is, are you saying that in your ideal world, it would just be open borders and everybody's here is automatically legal?
Oh, this is tough.
I guess the question is, you know, if we reform there's got to be reform, but what are the hallmarks that make it viable? Because not all
So-
reform can be viable.
Yeah, so I think I'm gonna kind of as maybe if I was like a politician, I think that a lot of the things that they're looking at is providing a reform and amnesty for people who have been here the longest, for people
Right, I
who
would
have,
agree.
right, but I think in order to have a more in-depth conversation would probably require a lot of time, and I think I'm way far left on this spectrum than most, and I'm not a
I
politician,
understand.
so I don't, I don't know the intricacies of how to make something like this pass Congress, but I do think that I did have hope with some of the bills that were already passed the House and presented in the Senate. They did have those things. They had certain dates, like if you can prove you're here by this date, if you can prove continuous presence for 10 years, if you can prove you didn't have any of the criminal issues, that was what that's still pending right now. It's just that they haven't voted on it yet. So
Yes. I think there's so many, like DACA, I think that what I would reform I'd want is, if you're DACA, we're done. You're here legally. I mean, that's a kind of a hallmark of reform that I envision, because it's such a no person's land, DACA.
yeah, and
I understand it's complicated to respond. I know. I struggle with it even as I have no legal background. I struggle with it, so I can imagine with you.
and what's tough is that at the beginning of this administration, a lot of us thought, DACA is a no-brainer. Like even
Right,
for
right.
really far-right Republicans, like how can you oppose that? And now it's like I've lost a lot of hope. Like, are we even going to get any type of permanent reform for those who do have DACA?
How about also those people who have served in the army, who have served and defended our country? They should all
mhm.
be. They should be given citizenship. Yeah.
So yeah, there are provisions. Now it's a lot tougher to join the military if you're not a permanent resident or a citizen. Under the Obama administration, there were some like kind of special ways that people who had DACA could actually serve in the military. Now it's really difficult. But yeah, I agree that, and in fact, there are provisions that will allow for people in the military to apply for a form of relief for parents and spouses that are undocumented. So if I'm a U.S. citizen and I join the Marines and my parents are undocumented, there is a kind of very narrow provision that might help my parents get status here in the U.S.
I know we could keep going, and I do see at least one other question down here, but I do want to take a moment and just mention some things that are rising up in our recaps. So something that has shown up is obviously that there is an undercurrent of racism and value of the other, right? That like even when we say, well, let them in, we still are valuing them as people who will take jobs that we don't want, as long as they take the jobs we don't want. I mean, I'm not saying that's what the group said, but also that is one of the sentiments that comes up, right? Well, at least they have a value in our country if they go do the grunt work. We have inherent racism that comes along through within the DACA system, and that you have to work for it to earn your place here. And yet, even when folks do earn it, they're not receiving that, which is very different from what our groups are noting in Scripture, which is that Christ is calling us to a level of hospitality. And many of us have experienced what it is to have received that hospitality, and also to have been denied that hospitality in some circumstance, maybe not to the same degree, but to have been denied that hospitality, and that Christ is calling us toward that hospitality for the stranger, to make them feel comfortable, and to welcome them into all spaces, just as we would hope to be welcomed in as well. We note that it's not easy to accept strangers, and the number one thread that has risen up is that relationships are the key going forward. but also those take time. So Bianca, I really need to ask this question, I think, kind of bringing all of these group discussions together. What is something that we could actually do now? Because saying it's going to take time kind of lets us off the hook for the work that can be done right now. So what are some things that in the midst of creating relationships we can be doing that can help mitigate the circumstances right now, mitigate that folks are sitting in detention centers or who are separated from their children or who don't have sufficient language accessibility? What are some things that we can do to mitigate those circumstances now as Christians?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I do get asked this a lot. I think there's a lot of ways. There's people who have money that can donate money. There are really great organizations, and not just like ours who are actually doing the legal services, but there are organizations that are helping out families like get settled, like housing, food, childcare. There's one organization in Sacramento that actually what they do is pay the bus fare when people get out of detention and they're hundreds of miles away from wherever their family is. So there's people who have money who can help by donating money, finding the right organizations and doing that. There's people who maybe money is not what you can give, but you can give time. Those same organizations, I can guarantee so many of them need volunteers, whether it's, you know, staffing phones or doing that work of like, I'm buying a plane ticket for this family that just got out of a detention center in Mississippi and their family's in California. Like, how do we get that family here? So I think, you know, finding those organizations and plugging in how you can. I think there's also something to be said about having these day-to-day conversations with people in our families and in our circles who just hear what they hear on the radio or see those headlines and think, yep, those people in those caravans are coming and, you know, we don't have enough resources here. How can we accept them? And really going beyond that and trying to dig deeper and having conversations and be like, but like, have you looked into why people are coming to the United States and really changing the narrative, right? Of it's fearful, you know, we are in the US, we have our resources are scarce. And so we can't accept everyone coming in and our country's going to change if we accept everyone. But like dig deeper, look at, you know, why are people coming and understanding the intricacies of immigration. I have had a lot of people that I know that are very, very, very conservative and very anti-immigrant who reached out to me because of some sort of relationship that we had. I wouldn't say that we were friends, but acquaintances that said, you know what, can I just have a really honest conversation where I ask questions like, why aren't these people applying for their permanent residence card? Why aren't these people applying for citizens? Why are they here for 40 years and don't do anything? And then, you know, having a frank conversation where it's like, they're able to see that it's not just what they see on the news, but like having conversations with people that may know a little bit more than they do and listening.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. We just have a brief moment, so we'll see if we can squeeze in these last two before we have our closing prayer. Deacon Tom, you had a question?
Well, actually, my question, I think, sort of got addressed just now. So
Okay.
All I really want to say at this point is I count myself very privileged that Bianca is a friend and a colleague. We've worked together on a variety of different projects over the last few years. And she's every bit as awesome as she seems right now, all the time. So just saying.
I love
Thank
it.
you, Deacon.
And Deacon Terry, let's see if we can get your question answered real quick.
So I'm losing hope here. I have a dear friend who is one of those parents who was brought here as a child by her parents when she was maybe 10 or 11. She's now in her 50s, had 3 children here. What happened, the family all was applied and was granted citizenship, but they did not apply for her because at the age of 15, she fell in love with a man, a boy that they did not like. So they said, we are not getting you citizenship. But they've been married 30 years. And during that time, she's really had a hard life. There's no doctor's appointments. no dentist appointments. She doesn't leave her house except to go to church and go to the grocery store, basically. Her daughter, I've become very close with. She's married to my son. And she worries constantly, and especially in the last administration. So you're saying there's no pathway? Because I wanted to help her get citizenship. I mean, I was sobbing when I realized that she is a nobody to this country. And that's disturbing.
Her husband is a citizen, though. So her
Yeah.
husband and her 3 children are citizens. She graduated from high school here, and she has no accent whatsoever. She's been here so long. I mean, it's just, you would never know unless she told you about the situation.
And she really hasn't stayed in contact with family in Mexico because she would never go back because she was afraid she would never be able to come back here where her immediate family is. So can the husband give waivers? Can her mom give a waiver? I think her mom is still living. I don't know. Are you saying there's no pathway?
So I think that story kind of exemplifies some of these client stories where what you said about, she's the nobody in this country. I think like on paper, a lot of our clients feel that way. Obviously our job, not, as neighbors and friends and community members is to look beyond that and really show them that they do have, they do matter and they are somebody to us. I to keep it short, I would probably say, has she ever had an immigration consultation with a reputable attorney? There's a lot of immigration fraud with private attorneys. And so I would be happy if anybody here wants to give you my contact information. We are a statewide nonprofit, so I'd be happy to do like a free consultation with her.
Oh, great, thank you. Because we're ready to help her get citizenship. I want to relieve my daughter-in-law. She worries all the time.
Of course, yeah.
Because any income they have is through his Social Security and his. So if he ever dies and he is not in good health, she's.
And she won't get that. She won't get that Social
She gets
Security
nothing.
money. She gets nothing.
No. So she is somebody to me. And I said she's a nobody. That's to
No, I understood. Yeah, I completely
the administration or the country or what have you. Anyway.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you, Deacon Terry. Thank you, Bianca. What a difficult, I want to use the word story, but I need us to understand that this is not just a story, it is someone's life. And this is just one life among millions who are struggling to be seen and heard. When we know as Christians that God has already seen and heard them and called their name and called them beloved, our job now is to help be the advocates within our nation for just policies that will allow for them to also be seen and heard here within this country. Deacon Tom, I'm turning it back over to you for any final items and our closing prayer. You're muted.
Of course. Thank you so much, Bianca, for your time with us, particularly on what sounds like a pretty difficult day already. And really, it was a wonderful evening. And as always, your insight and your passion, are inspiring, and it really was really informative for us too. There'll be some homework coming your way, but I think really for right now, I'm going to turn to Jonathan, who is going to be praying us out for this evening. And thank you again for your time in this evening, and look forward to seeing you again next week.
The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Lord of light and love, thank you for this evening. Thank you for the things that you're teaching us. And we ask for your mercy and for your wisdom in how to proceed. We pray for our brothers and sisters that are living in constant fear. And we ask for ways to show your warmth, to show your hospitality, to show your love. And that these systems of fear, systems of oppression would be crushed, would go down, would be eliminated, and that your love would be allowed to illuminate in this land. We ask that you would give us wisdom in terms of how to reach out, how to be loving, and how to be your hands and feet in this time. Thank you for gathering us. Thank you for Bianca's talk this evening, and ask for your blessing on this evening. In Jesus' name.
Thank you, friends. See you again next week.